Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Randy Conley. He is the Vice President of Global Professional Services and Trust Practice Leader for the Ken Blanchard Companies. He is a founding member of the Alliance of Trustworthy Business Experts, and Inc.com named him a top 100 leadership speaker. Randy is a contributing author of 3 books, including Simple Truths of Leadership with Ken Blanchard, which we're going to be discussing today. Randy's award-winning blog, Leading with Trust, has influenced over 4 million viewers since its inception in 2012. Welcome to the show, Randy.
Thank you, Andrea. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's so I am so excited to have this conversation about trust and servant leadership. So many these topics are so important right now for so many different reasons. And I think we all know it. We all know it.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about your own background, your career history, and how you came to write this book with Ken Blanchard?
Sure. I have been with the Ken Blanchard Companies for 26 years this year. And I started in a project management capacity, managing the training interventions that we do with, Fortune 1000 organizations. And about 15 years ago, I started getting into the field of trust, doing research, doing writing. I had moved into senior leadership roles within the organization. I've been on our executive leadership team and have led different parts of our business over the years. And trust had always been a core value of mine. And when we as an organization started to do more work around training around trust, I took the banner. I raised my hand and said, hey, that's what I believe leadership is all about. I want to take the lead and, moving forward in that area. So that really began the journey. Started blogging a lot and just built it up over time. And over that course of time, I've co-authored our Building Trust training program that we use within organizations. And Ken and I had talked for a number of years about writing a book together. And inevitably something would come up and one of us would get busy on some other project, and it never really gained a lot of traction until, like many things over the last couple of years, the summer of COVID 2020 sort of allowed us a little, time and space to say, hey, let's pick this up. Let's finish this off. So we did that, and it's really a collection of simple truths that Ken has been teaching about for the last 40 years on servant leadership. And then I took the section on trust and highlighted the simple truths I've been trying to teach over the last 15 years on trust. And it's become sort of I like to think of it as like a leadership devotional book almost, because there's 52 simple truths, one for each week. Short, sweet, that are accompanied with very actionable steps that you can take to start implementing that truth. Because as the subtitle on the book says, our goal is to make common sense common practice. These are all common sense things that most of us have heard or learned or intuitively know, but they're not common practice. We just don't see them being utilized. So it's our humble attempt to make a little dent in the universe and bring a little more common sense into common practice.
Which we can all use, definitely. So before we jump into the book, I'm curious, you've been writing on your blog for 10 years. What have you learned about yourself, about blogging, about trust, whatever you want to say through that process? Because that is a long period of time to really go through some of those personal things too that you deal with as a writer, as a thought leader.
Yes, I've learned lots of things. One key thing is that writing really forces you to get clear on your own thoughts and beliefs about something, right? Take all that craziness that just kind of swirls around and you're not maybe quite sure how you feel or think about a particular issue or topic. but writing forces you to articulate that. So for any aspiring thought leaders out there, writing is like a must-have. It forces you to get your point of view out. It also has allowed me to process my own leadership development. My writing over the years has been very much a living laboratory, because I have always been a working leader, leading people and teams within the organization, as well as being a subject matter expert and a trainer and consultant. It's forced me to walk my talk. And we sort of jokingly mention in the organization here, if my colleagues were to closely read my blog articles, they'd understand what my personal teams are dealing with, because I'm often writing about the very management and leadership situations that I'm dealing with, of course, changing names and little details to protect people in the company. But it's really been a very insightful growth process. I've never been one on the personal side that's engaged in like journaling, in terms of like a spiritual practice or just a personal development practice. I've never done that. But when I look back on my blog, I've done that professionally, because I would write up until the last 2 years. I published an article every week. And to do that for nearly 10 years, publish a weekly article, that's number one. I can't believe I stayed that disciplined in doing it. And number two, it really is a development process. So I encourage people out there, leaders, practicing leaders, write.
Yeah.
Even if you do a journal, write. It really helps you get clear on your own thinking.
Oh yeah, I agree. I used to be a prolific journaler until I got married.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And then it was like, get married, have kids. Now I can't journal anymore.
That's right.
But I can relate also to the I can't believe I did it this long comment, just because we've been doing this podcast for 5 years. I'm like, I cannot believe I've actually stuck with this that long.
Yeah, it's that cliche, that old proverb of a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, right? You just take one
other step.
That's right. You just keep taking steps, and don't worry about the long-term goal. Just take the next step in front of you, and before you know it, you look back and you're like, wow, it's been 5 years since I've been doing this podcast. Look at how many people I've touched and influenced. And, you probably get those comments from listeners of like, oh, Andrea, wow, that one guest or that one thing you said really changed my thinking about this. And it makes you think, wow, I'm doing positive, good work here, right? I'm really impacting people.
You'd mentioned using your team and your, real life examples while changing names and that sort of thing. But with the, since trust is such a big thing for you, I'm curious how you handle that with your team. So they obviously know that you're writing about them too. So how does that work?
Very delicately and very sensitively, using what I hope has been good judgment over the years. Certainly, if it was really delicate issues I was dealing with, I wouldn't write about those. I would write about the more mundane, common, having challenging performance discussions with someone, right? How do you build trust through that? You've got to deliver difficult feedback to someone, but yet how do you leave them feeling better off because of their interaction with you and having higher trust that you're in their corner, right? And you want them to succeed. So I would, number one, if I ever wanted to mention a specific situation, I would go to that person first and tell them, thinking about writing an article about, this thing we had. Are you okay if I do that? Of course, I won't mention you. I'll change details so no one would really know it's about you. But so you have to use good judgment and be very careful. But there's any working leader or manager knows there is plenty of fodder to write about, right? Every day is a different day, new challenges all the time. Plus, working with clients, I sort of get the bonus of seeing all the craziness and all these other organizations, that I work with. So I usually don't have a shortage of material to draw from.
I understand.
Mhm.
Great. Okay, so let's dive into the book. We
Yeah.
know that the beginning of it, we have Ken Blanchard talking about servant leadership. Could you kind of refresh our audience about what servant leadership is?
Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of misconceptions about servant leadership. People hear that term, and a lot of times they think, oh, that's the soft, warm, fuzzy kind of leadership, right? Just let people do what they want. Or it's the inmates running the prison. And I'm like, oh, boy, isn't that a wonderful metaphor for work, right? Like it's a prison and the inmates are in charge. Or they think it's some religious movement or something, related to that. Servant leadership is essentially leaders placing the needs of their followers ahead of their own and doing what they can to be of service to people to help them be their best. And, the term servant leadership was really coined by Robert Greenleaf back in the early 70s. Greenleaf was a executive at AT&T and also started writing about this idea of servant leadership, and that really kind of cemented the term, but it's really being of service to people.
Great. So when one is a servant leader and they're focused on doing what they can for everybody else, is there also room for them to receive from others?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I believe part of servant leadership is it taps into the universal principle that you reap what you sow. You give good to people, you support people, and they in turn are there to support you. It's a win-win situation between a leader and their followers. But it's also important to distinguish between the two parts of servant leadership. There's a servant part and a leadership part. And the leadership part, if we start there, that's the responsibility of the leader. And that's setting the vision, direction, and goals of where the team is going, right? Because everyone needs to know where we're headed. The servant part is then when you take that proverbial organizational pyramid and you flip it upside down. And rather than the leader being at the top and everybody sort of sucks up the hierarchy, right? And they're responsive to the leader who's up there. Now the leader's at the bottom of the pyramid and they're responsive to the people above them, helping them achieve their goals. We like to say that leadership is something you do with people, not to people.
Absolutely. I say the same thing about influence.
Right. Yeah, influence. It's something you do with people. And speaking of influence, if you're trying to influence the thoughts, actions, attitudes, behaviors of another person, you're engaging in leadership. Mm-hmm. Leadership at its most fundamental definition is an influence process. And you do that coming alongside people. It's not a dictatorial, you shall do this, you shall do that. It's, hey, we've agreed this is the direction we're going. Let's get there together. I'm here to support you. You're here to support me. Let's go.
Yeah, love that. Okay. You were just now talking about needing to set the vision and the goals and all that. What makes an organizational vision actually compelling?
I believe one element is having a clear picture of what that is. Like, can you actually define that picture of the future? If you were to achieve that vision, what does that picture of the future look like? That gives people something tangible to strive towards. I think one of the challenges all organizations face is sort of that generic platitude of a vision, like, we're going to be the most excellent home healthcare provider, right? Or whatever the slogan is, but it's so broad and generic, although it could be somewhat inspirational or aspirational, it's not clear. It's like, what exactly are we striving to be?
Mm.
So I think the more that we as leaders can get that vision crystal clear and then help people connect to how do their personal values, goals, and desires align with that. I think one of the key challenges we all face in change management, getting people to change from one direction and going to another, is that we try to sell people on, everything about this change effort or the vision, if we're talking organizational vision. And we try to get them to adopt a whole new set of values and ideals rather than saying, what are your current values and how do those align with where we're going? Make it a win-win rather than, it's not so important what you believe or hear. You've just got to go this way with that. So
That's a really important point, to not just come at change as a fresh start most of the time, but to build on what is already good and already working.
Yeah. Yeah. Because most of us, we have a lot of good things that we've accomplished or built over time. And we don't want to just, I won't say totally abandon those, but we don't want to just relegate them off to the side because the organization we're a part of says, no, it's all about this. Let's help people connect to who they are and what they believe to how that is manifested in what we as the organization together are going to do.
Absolutely. What do you say characterizes trust between colleagues? It's like, how do you know that you have trust?
Great question. One of the challenges that we face, and at our Simple Truth, let me see which number it is. It's Simple Truth number 28. Building trust is a skill that can be learned and developed. Most people don't think of trust as a skill. They think of it as just this feeling that sort of happens over time, right? Like the longer you're in relationship with someone, trust will either develop or it won't. And the research in trust says that there are 4 aspects of trust, or 4 elements that comprise trust in a relationship. It's your competence, your integrity, the care you show in relationship, and your dependability. Those are the 4 key elements of trust. And so we created a model that we lovingly call the ABCDs of trust. It's the language of trust. The A stands for able. Do you demonstrate competence? Are you an able leader? Do you have the knowledge, skills, expertise to be good at what you do? People trust you when you're a good performer, right? When you know your stuff. The B stands for believable. Do you act with integrity? Are you honest? Do you walk the talk? Do you make reasonable promises that you can actually keep? Do you treat people fairly? The C stands for connected. Do you care about others? Do you build rapport? Do you put their interests ahead of your own? Do you really have their back? Do you care about them as people? Or do you treat them just as, workers showing up to do a job? And then the D stands for dependable. Honor your commitments. Do you follow through? Do you hold yourself and your team accountable? So if you can use behaviors, the reason trust is a skill is it's under our control. We can use behaviors that align with those ABCDs of trust. And if we do that, we'll build trust. Others will perceive us as being trustworthy. And unfortunately, the opposite is true, right? If we don't use those behaviors, then people perceive us as untrustworthy. So trust doesn't just automatically happen. You have to make an effort, and it requires a risk. Someone's got to make the first move. And I believe that's the leader's job. That's Simple Truth number 30. Someone must make the first move to establish trust. Leaders, you go first.
Mm-hmm.
So many leaders think just because the title on the door tag, the name tag on the office door says leader, manager, boss, that by virtue of that, people should grant you their trust. And it's not true. You have to first extend trust to others. And in turn, they will reciprocate and give their trust back to you.
That is such a good point. I've certainly seen that as well. Just this expectation that people need to trust us, and when you're in executive leadership positions, but that doesn't just come.
That's right. It's sort of that.
So when you say they need to extend trust, and by the way, I want to come back to your ABCD.
Yeah,
I'll come back to that in a second. But when you say that a leader needs to start by extending trust first, what do you mean by extending trust? Are you saying that the leader is trusting that person first before? Okay.
Yes, it's having a mindset of you are trustworthy and I am willing to relinquish control and take a risk, because risk is inherent in trust. Risk is critically important, because if there's no risk involved, there's no need to trust. If you and I walked into a casino in Vegas and we saw some table game that had 0% risk, every time we placed a bet, we won money, we'd stay there all night, right? We'd take that bet every day because there's no risk involved. We don't have to trust what the outcome will be. But in the world of interpersonal dynamics and human relationships, you're taking a risk. Whenever you put your time, your money, your self-esteem, your ideas in the hands of someone else, you're making yourself vulnerable. You're taking a risk. And so you have to be comfortable with relinquishing control. That's the other simple truth that's one of my favorites is trust. Distrust is not the opposite of trust. The opposite of trust is control.
Oh my goodness, I want to come back to that one. Okay.
Yeah.
I have to go back to what I wanted to go back to first.
Yeah. So to answer that question, yes. Yes. Leaders have to say, hey, team, I trust that you will take this, you'll take ownership, and you'll follow through. Because, the true mark of a leader is what happens when you're not there, right? It's like, can you leave and trust that your team's going to operate on all cylinders and take care of business without you there?
Absolutely. And you were talking about the model, the ABCD model. And we actually used your model, and it brought up some really good conversations. So I just wanted to let you know that.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear. That model has proved to be really helpful to a lot of people, because it's a handy way to take this big nebulous issue of trust, and distill it down to what its core principles are all about. And when you understand that trust is behaviorally based, then we can start to talk about trust in an organization and deal with trust issues by focusing on the behaviors, right? If you and I could talk about how does this sound? If I say, Andrea, you've missed your Friday reporting deadline for the last 3 weeks. I just don't trust you to get it done, versus if I said, Andrea, I've noticed the last 3 weeks, you haven't made the deadline for the reports. I'm concerned that something's going on there. Let's talk about not meeting the deadline. I don't even mention the word trust, right? I'm focused on the behavior of not meeting the deadline. That's what's causing the low trust in our relationship. But when you mention the T word in a conversation, right? Defensiveness goes up, the walls go up, people get, like, oh, what? You're calling me untrustworthy? Because none of us think that we're untrustworthy, right? I don't think anyone rolls out of bed in the morning and says, I can't wait to get to work today and just break trust with everybody I interact with, right? We just don't do that. But we do, usually unintentionally, erode trust. A little bit here, a little bit there, right? Missed deadline here, late meeting attendance there, a harsh word here, maybe telling a white lie there, not giving our best effort on a project or something, and it just chips away over time. And but if we can stay focused on those ABCDs of trust, and remember, every interaction we have with someone, it's an opportunity to either build trust or erode trust.
Yeah.
Right? What do we want that to be?
And just because you ask for feedback doesn't mean people trust you enough to give it to you.
Yes, 100% true. You have to earn that trust, right? I think that's one of the greatest gifts a leader can give to themselves is to have truth tellers, right? To have trusted relationships with one or more people that they can be your truth tellers, that they're the ones that are willing to come to you after the meeting, right? The group meeting, and say, Randy, you came down pretty hard on John, about that thing. You might want to think about addressing that with him, or I had a manager one time that reported to me who she was very conscientious about maintaining our one-on-one meetings. She came prepared all the time. She always had an agenda. She really looked forward to our time because I was crazy busy, and it was her one time to have my undivided attention, right? And give me status updates, and we talk about projects coming up. And there was a period of time where I was running with my hair on fire, like a lot of leaders, and I was willy-nilly canceling our meetings, and not doing a good job telling her why, or not rescheduling meetings. And fortunately, this is to her credit, we had built up enough trust in our relationship that she was able to call me on the carpet, right? And she came to me and she said, Randy, D, dependable, you preach about it to people, right? I'm not feeling like you're following through on your commitments. I can't trust that we're going to meet, and I'm saving up all my agenda items so that I'm not bombarding you constantly with things. I said, Wendy, you're right on. I'm sorry. It was a great opportunity for me to demonstrate the power of an apology and start to restore trust. So leaders, cultivate those truth tellers in your life, because they're the ones that will be those little guardrails right on the kiddie bowling alley, the bumpers, keep the ball from going in the gutter. We need those people to keep us from going into the gutter.
I appreciate that you mentioned apologizing, but you also talk about forgiveness. And one of the simple truths that you talk about is apologizing isn't necessarily an admission of guilt, but it is an admission of responsibility. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. I was just working with a client group this morning, and we got into a very rich discussion about that very topic in it, because the person in this session said, I don't think you should really have to apologize for something you didn't do, right? Like why are you apologizing for that? And I agree. I'm not suggesting people go around apologizing for things they didn't do and, kind of becoming a doormat for people, right? And, assuming ownership of things that aren't theirs. But each of us can apologize for letting a situation get to the point where it has. And sometimes it's more effective for the leader to apologize, to take ownership of the relationship and prioritize the long-term health of that over who was right, who was wrong on this particular issue. And it could be something as simple as, Andrea, I'm sorry that you and I can't come to agreement on this, right? But I really value you, and I value our working relationship, and I want it to be the best it can be. So, can we get a fresh start here? Can we talk about how we can move forward in a more productive manner? That's an example of taking ownership over valuing the relationship over valuing who's right. Too often we get in this tit for tat of I'm right, you're wrong, right? And many times that's counterproductive, right? It doesn't get us anywhere to fight that battle.
Yeah. Yeah. And the temptation is to keep a ledger.
Yes.
Uh, but another piece of that is forgiveness. And it's not like forgiveness is talked about a ton in leadership development and
No.
corporate settings. So yeah, what are your thoughts on forgiveness, and how do you encourage people to utilize forgiveness when things are difficult? When what I mean, forgiveness is a really big topic because
It
it's
is.
not just, it could be restoration of the relationship,
Yep.
but it
Yeah.
could also then not have the restoration of the
Yes.
relationship and still forgive. So yeah, talk to us about forgiveness.
Yes. Wow, where to start on that? You're right. It's such a big and heavy topic. Leadership is all about relationships, right? It's all about working with people and, organizationally speaking, getting work done through people. So relationships have to have a top priority for us as leaders. And we need to have healthy, well-maintained relationships, right? We just can't write people off every time they do something to let us down or offend us or, do something that we don't like you said, keeping that ledger. Otherwise, we would have nobody on our team, right? Because we're all humans. We all make mistakes and let people down.
We're much more likely to keep track of the things that we don't like.
Yes.
Keeping actual track of the things and giving them the weight that they deserve for the things that we do appreciate.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So true. And there are some myths about forgiveness that I think keep leaders from really pursuing forgiveness or even talking about it. One myth is that if you forgive someone, that makes you a weakling or a doormat, right? Like it's admitting, that you're accepting whatever they did, so therefore you're a weakling. Not true. There's also a myth that by withholding forgiveness from someone, you're punishing them, right? You're keeping something from them that they really need. Not true. And I think another myth is that forgiving equals forgetting, right? Because you forgive someone, it means you have to forget what they did. Not true either, right? Or that forgiveness is letting, a fourth myth, forgiveness is letting people off the hook, right? That they don't suffer any consequences. Not true. Here's why I think forgiveness is really important for leaders. The only person you're harming by not choosing the path of forgiveness is yourself. Forgiveness is something that rests entirely within each of us. It's something that we grant to others. It's not something that anyone can earn or, purchase. It's up to us to give it. And we included two simple truths about forgiveness, and we ended the book with those very intentionally, and I'll tell you why. But one simple truth says, choosing not to forgive someone is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die, right? It's like all it does, choosing not to forgive, it just rots us from the inside out, right? The second simple truth is forgiveness is letting go of all hopes for a better past. We can't change the past. We can't change what someone may have done to us. We can't always have control over what impacts us, but we do have control over what happens within us and how we choose to respond. And so when we choose the path of forgiveness, we're saying, I'm releasing all this pain and energy and pent up frustration or anger. I'm releasing it for myself. It's a weight off my shoulders. And I'm choosing to move forward in a healthy, productive manner. Doesn't necessarily mean, depending upon the offense and the situation, maybe the relationship has suffered irreparable harm, right? But maybe it can be salvaged as well. And if you choose to forgive someone, it Doesn't mean you forget what happened, right? You'll always remember that. It doesn't mean that there's no consequences. People still need to experience consequences, natural or imposed consequences for their behavior. But it allows you to step out of that seat of being, judge and jury and say, I'm letting this go. It's my choice whether to forgive or not. And as we've talked to people over the last, since February when we published the book, that has really resonated with folks, because I think coming through COVID in the last couple of years with all the layoffs, when COVID first hit and all the yucky stuff people have had to deal with, people are holding on to a lot of angst, a lot of baggage, a lot of hurt feelings over how they've been treated or how they perceive they've been treated. And so I just really encourage people to give forgiveness a strong consideration. Think about the benefits. Actually be a little selfish and think about how much better you'll feel, if you choose the path of forgiveness.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. At Voice of Influence, we've been kind of exploring the relationship of someone having a personal sense of agency to the engagement that they feel at work. So feeling like what they do and say matters. What are your thoughts on the importance of personal agency of team members as it relates to a leader's ability to gain trust?
I think they are tightly connected. When I think of the word agency, I think of autonomy and control. People have autonomy and control over how they show up at work or how they do their work, how they make decisions about their work. And in order to have that freedom and autonomy, they need the trust. They need to both earn the trust of their leaders so that the leaders also feel comfortable extending their trust to them to have agency and utilize their full skills, bring their full selves to work. And so it's just like foundational to that concept, having trust there. I also think of one of our other simple truths. It's simple truth number 12, create autonomy through boundaries, which is a little paradoxical, right? People think autonomy, freedom, I can do whatever I want. But we like to use the analogy of a river without banks is just a large puddle, right? A river has these banks that channel the energy. And part of a leader's job, I believe, is to set the appropriate boundaries for their team and say, hey, folks, within these boundaries, you've got free reign. Go for it, right? Like, number one, you have to give them the training, the tools, the resources, right, to do their best work. But assuming you've got a team of capable and committed performers, here's the boundaries, folks. Channel your energy. Go for it, right? I think the opposite of that is the micromanagers, right? Micromanagers who are constantly looking over the shoulder, checking on everyone to make sure they're doing it exactly the way the manager wants it done. That's a big trust eroder. So if you want to extinguish someone's feelings of agency, micromanage them, right? Tell them what to do, how to do, when to do. You'll crush the spirit of anyone by doing that. But give people autonomy by setting the appropriate boundaries. Let them go for it. You'll see people flourish within that environment.
Yeah, it reminded me of what you said earlier when you were talking about control, and by taking your hands off the wheel a little bit, that gives other people a chance to step up. And
that's right.
And so as they are stepping up and stepping into what they're able to do, then you can continue to build more and more trust and more autonomy, as you're talking
That
about.
that's a beautiful point. I think it's easy for leaders to lose sight of that, because as leaders, most leaders have risen to their positions because they're the fixers, the problem solvers, right? They're the best at what they do. They know how to get things done, right? And it's sort of hardwired into our performance that we go around fixing problems and making things happen. Well, if we're constantly doing that, we're really creating a state of dependency among our team members, right? Because they start to see that after a while and they think, oh, doesn't matter what I do, Randy's going to come along and change it anyway. He's going to fix it, right? Or,
Exactly.
Versus, oh, Randy's not going to step in here. He trusts me to do it. No one else is going to do it. This is an opportunity for me to step up and use my skills and abilities.
You know, that also makes me think of that question I asked you towards the beginning: is there room for servant leaders to receive from others? I have found that one of the most powerful ways for people to find their voice, if you will, is when they share an idea or share advice, and I actually listen and take it in and make a change and then let them know. You actually made a difference for me. So it's not just me serving you all the time, but you're serving me as
Yes.
well. You're influencing me as well. And that made a difference. And when people are acknowledged for the differences that they make, I think that helps them also with the trust in the relationship to feel like, oh, you see me.
Yes. I completely agree with you, Andrea, because as you said, you are showing them that they influenced you and that you trust and value them enough that you would listen. That was a big key that you said. I actually stop and listen. Listening, the most underrated yet powerful leadership skill there is, right? You listened, you took in their feedback, and you changed your behavior. And that is such a huge trust booster. I like to call, we either engage in trust boosting behavior or trust busting behavior. That's a huge trust booster because people say, oh, Andrea's open to feedback, right? She didn't punish me or reprimand me or blow me off for giving feedback. She actually listened. She not only listened, she actually did something with it. Wow. How much more comfortable am I going to feel the next time when I say, oh, Andrea, I've got this new project idea, right? Or Andrea, we had this big hiccup with a customer, right? Because they know that you're open to feedback and open to hearing from them. Yeah.
I think it also makes them maybe even a little more open to us, So it's amazing how this is such a great topic. And here, okay, this is my last official question. I've got one more after we talk a little bit more, but okay. New York Times headline today reads this: trust in U.S. democracy has eroded across the political spectrum. A Times Siena poll found, with 58% of voters saying the system needs reform. What do you think that it will take for trust to improve in the U.S. democracy? I just would love to hear your perspective.
Wow. Whenever we hear or see headlines like that, what's being talked about is what's called generalized trust, right? That's a type of trust that is broadly applied to institutions, governments, right? And it's generally the questions that are asked in those are something along the lines of, how confident are you that the government does the right thing? Disagree, strongly disagree, strongly agree, right? So they're very broad, generalized questions. But having said that, trust always starts at the interpersonal level. Institutional trust, generalized trust, is just a broad outgrowth of what people are experiencing on an interpersonal level. And so I'd like to say sometimes when conversation turns to we have a crisis of trust in the government, more specifically, we have a crisis of trust in leaders. You know, we don't have so much a crisis of trust as we have a crisis of untrustworthy leaders, right? So all we have to do is look at any headline anywhere, right, of any politician or, you know, in the world of celebrities or whatever. It goes back to the behaviors that people are using, right? Saying one thing, but doing another, right? Having motives that aren't genuine. Having power, you know, control issues, wanting to stay in power versus doing what's right. You know, I certainly wouldn't claim to have the answer to fix the whole system in a podcast interview with you, but I would say it comes back to each of us as individuals and modeling the type of trustworthy behavior we want to see and trying to be that positive influence. You know, it's somewhat the cliche of what often attributed to Gandhi, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, right? Well, be the trust you want to see in the world, you know, expect that, hold those expectations to others, the people we vote for, you know, sort of move beyond our political affiliations and ideologies to who's trustworthy, who's ethical, who's honest, right? You know, I mean, look at the personal characteristics of people that we're choosing to put into office to represent us. But we've got a long way to go. You know, an interesting factoid on those government trust surveys. Government trust, institutional trust it peaked in like between 58 and 61 was like the peak of that statement. You know, it was like in the 70 percentile range that people said, yeah, I trust the government to do what is right. And it's been on a downhill slope ever since then. You know, so many reasons why, right? You know, increase of media, there's very little left to secrets anymore, right? We see how people are behaving, social media, technology, all that sort of stuff. But it's a real challenge. We've got to correct the compass heading on that if we want to restore trust in government. I wrote an interesting article about it. I thought it was interesting. I enjoyed reading it, but I'll mention it here. If anyone goes to my blog, leadingwithtrust.com, go to the little search field and type in the acronym SERV or the word SERV, S-E-R-V. And I did a little play on the letter SERV, put the SERV back in public service. That's the title of the article. Let's put the SERV back into public service. And, you know, when you look back, we've got some really grand aspirational ideals for public service, right? Government service, public service used to be looked upon as a very noble profession. And I think many of the folks in government still have that ideal, but it's gotten so muddied and lost over the years, you know? So if we can all get back to putting that SERV back in public service, I think that'll do us a good course correction there.
Great. We'll find that article and link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So where can people find you and your book and the things that you've created?
All over the place. People who are interested in the book, you can go to simpletruthsofleadership.com. That's the book's website. From there, you can jump to your favorite bookseller. If you want to just learn a little bit more about the book or read a sample chapter before you spend your hard-earned money, that's the place to go. You can follow me on Twitter at Randy Conley. You can follow Ken Blanchard at Ken Blanchard. You can connect with both of us on LinkedIn. my blog, leadingwithtrust.com, or our company website, kenblanchard.com. So those are all the places you can find us.
And again, we'll link to that in the show notes. So my last question for you today, Randy, what last piece of advice would you give to somebody who would really like to have a voice of influence?
My piece of advice would be really strive to embody the ABCDs of trust. Look inward, look at yourself, be as trustworthy as you can be, act in ways that demonstrate your ability. Be good at what you do. Be a believable person, act with integrity, walk the talk, connect with others, establish genuine relationships with folks, and be dependable. Follow through on what you say you're going to do. If you do that, you can't help but have a voice of influence. Because when people start to think, who's a trusted advisor in our organization here that I could reach out to about this new project or this new opportunity, they're going to think of you because you embody those ABCDs of trust. So I would encourage people to start there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this great conversation, Randy, and for the book and for the work that you do and for being a voice of influence for our listeners today.
Oh, thank you, Andrea. It's been my pleasure.